Okay, so like we've all had that feeling, right? You know that moment when you realize, oh man, I fell for that? Like
Yeah,
maybe it was a deal that seemed too good to be true, or even just a friend's joke that had you going for a minute.
totally.
But today we're really diving deep into scams.
Um,
The kind of deception that leaves you feeling stuck, like seriously stuck.
yeah,
And we're approaching this with empathy, using insights from Getting Unstuck. It's by the Scars Institute. Have you heard of them?
I have. They're doing really important work helping people who've been scammed,
Yeah, they offer both compassion and practical advice, which is exactly what we're going for.
right?
No fear-mongering here. We just want to give you the knowledge to understand how scams affect people. And more importantly, to give you tools to move forward.
And one thing that really struck me about the Scars Institute's approach is this. They recognize that recovering from a scam isn't just about money. It's about healing from trauma.
That's so key. So let's unpack that. The guide starts by explaining why recovering from these scams can feel impossible. It all comes down to our brains. You know, that fight or flight response. Everyone's talking about it these days. That primal instinct we feel when something seems dangerous.
Right.
Well, imagine your brain stuck in that state, even after the danger is gone. That's a big part of what victims of scams go through.
It is. It's like your amygdala. That's the emotional center of your brain. It's stuck on overdrive. Think about a time you overreacted to something small because you were already stressed.
Oh, totally.
That's your amygdala calling the shots.
So our emotions kind of hijack our thinking.
Exactly. And to make things worse, while your amygdala is freaking out your prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain is sidelined. So you not only feel awful, but now it's harder to think clearly and make good decisions.
And this is especially true with scams that are really manipulative, like romance scams or scams targeting older people, right?
Absolutely. These situations are all about trust. When that trust is broken, it leaves people incredibly vulnerable.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how does SCARS address this?
So they focus on education as recovery. They have this thing called the Survivor School, and it's really about giving yourself information and tools to reclaim your life.
Oh, I love that. Knowledge is power. How does the Survivor School actually work?
It breaks the recovery process down into manageable daily steps, which
Oh.
makes sense because this stuff can be overwhelming.
So taking baby steps.
Exactly. It's like learning anything new. You wouldn't expect to be an expert overnight, right? You'd take it one step at a time. And it's the same principle here.
Okay, now I see how that connects. You're not trying to fix everything at once. It's more about taking small actions consistently.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really fascinating. When you're engaged in learning, especially reading the Survivor School material, it actually helps shift control back from that panicked amygdala to your prefrontal cortex.
Wait, so by reading and learning, we can calm down the emotional storm
Yeah,
and make space for rational thought again.
you got it. And you know what? This actually ties into what trauma experts like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk talk about. He wrote, "The body keeps the score." Maybe you've heard of it.
I have.
He says that trauma disconnects us from ourselves, mentally and physically.
That one.
But small steps, like reading and learning, they can help to rebuild that connection and allow for healing to happen gradually.
Okay, this is making a lot of sense.
Uh-huh.
So instead of being paralyzed by how huge the problem feels, you focus on small, doable actions that add up to big progress over time, like building a bridge back to yourself one brick at a time.
Exactly.
I love that analogy. So tell me more about this Survivor School. What kind of stuff does it cover?
It's not about dwelling on the negative or replaying everything in your mind over and over. It's about understanding how scams work, the psychology of manipulation, and then rebuilding trust in yourself and your own judgment.
So it's like taking a crash course in scam psychology.
Precisely. And a really powerful aspect is that it helps you see that your emotional response is normal. The shame, the guilt, the self-blame, these are all very natural reactions to going through something so violating.
That makes sense.
And when you can see that, you can start to let go of the self-blame and focus on your own well-being.
It's like finally exhaling after holding your breath for way too long. You realize you're not alone in this, and your feelings are valid,
Exactly.
which is such a relief.
Yeah.
And that's where real healing can finally begin,
Oh,
right?
You nailed it. Recognizing you're not alone and that your feelings are valid. That's huge for moving forward.
You know, it's almost like just understanding why this happens can be calming in itself.
Absolutely. When you understand how scams work, the psychology behind it all, the power dynamics, it's empowering.
Right? You realize, wait a minute, this wasn't just me messing up. There were actual strategies at play here.
Exactly. You start to reclaim your own narrative. You get your sense of agency back. Instead of blame and shame, it's about understanding and them feeling empowered. And that's how you can start to move forward.
Totally. And speaking of moving forward, Getting unstuck actually gives us some really practical advice. Things you can do right now. Because we all know knowledge without action is kind of pointless.
I couldn't agree more. So let's break down those 6 steps.
Okay.
First, acknowledge the trauma, then educate yourself. Seek support, take small steps, set boundaries, and consider professional help.
6 steps. I like it. Okay, step 1, acknowledge the trauma.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of obvious, but I imagine for some people just admitting they were scammed is hard enough, let alone dealing with all the emotions that come with it.
Yeah, that's true. This first step is about giving yourself permission to feel everything you're feeling. The anger, shame, guilt, sadness, all of it. No judgment. Just acknowledging this thing happened and it really affected me.
It's like showing yourself the same compassion you'd show a friend who's going through something hard.
Exactly. And as tough as it is, acknowledging the trauma is really the foundation for healing. You can't fix a wound if you don't even admit it's there.
Oof, yeah. That's a powerful way to put it. So once you've acknowledged the trauma, then what?
Step 2 is where the learning comes in. Educating yourself about the specific scam you experienced. How do these things work? What's the psychology behind them? That knowledge can be really powerful.
Because then it becomes less about what was I thinking and more, wow, they really knew how to play on this common human reaction.
Exactly. And if you're ready to connect with others who really get it, step 3 is seeking support. Could be family friends, a therapist, online support groups. There's a lot out there.
Just that reminder that you're not alone in this. There are other people who understand and are there to listen, offer advice, or even just be there.
Sometimes that's really all it takes to start feeling less lost.
Oh.
And then step 4 brings us back to those baby steps we were talking about earlier. Being kind to yourself and knowing that healing takes time.
Yeah, no need to rush into anything. So what kind of small steps are we talking about here?
It could be as simple as reading just 1 article a day from the Survivor School program, or maybe doing a little bit of mindfulness, or even just journaling about what you're going through. Small actions, but over time, they really add up.
Building that momentum, brick by brick.
Yeah.
And regaining that sense of control, which feels so important after you've lost it. Okay, what about step 5? Setting boundaries. How does that fit into scam recovery?
Well, remember how we talked about scammers targeting people's vulnerabilities? Setting boundaries is a way to take your power back. It's about protecting yourself from being taken advantage of again, not just by other people, but also by your own negative self-talk.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's about learning to say no to things that drain you, whether that's people-pleasing or dwelling on the past. It's about putting yourself first.
Exactly, creating those healthy boundaries in your life. And then finally, step 6, which kind of goes hand in hand with boundaries, reaching out for professional help if you need it.
Yes, there's no shame in asking for help.
None at all. It actually takes a lot of strength to say, I need some help with this. And the good news is there are so many incredible professionals out there who can guide you through it.
People who really understand the nuances of what it means to recover from a scam and can offer strategies and support.
It can make such a difference. It's so true. Sometimes we just need a little extra help to process those really complex emotions. And, a trauma-informed therapist, that can be life-changing.
Yeah, because they can provide that safe space to work through everything you're feeling and start developing those healthy coping mechanisms.
Exactly. It's like having a guide for that journey of healing and recovery. Someone who gets it, someone who can offer you strategies and help you through those inevitable bumps in the road. Because let's be real, recovery isn't always a straight line up, is it?
Definitely not. It's more of a winding path with its ups and downs.
Exactly. And having that support can make all the difference.
For sure. So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into getting unstuck today, what's the one thing you really hope listeners take away from it?
That's a good question. I think the biggest takeaway is that recovery is possible. It might not be easy. It's definitely not a race. But with the right knowledge and support, you can move through this and you can heal.
I love that.
Yeah.
And every step forward, no matter how small, it's a victory. It's something to celebrate.
Absolutely.
It's so easy to feel overwhelmed these days, with how common scams have become. Everywhere you turn, there's a new story about it.
Yeah.
But exploring the Survivor School, it's a good reminder that there are resources out there. There are people who understand.
Yeah.
And there is a path forward.
For sure. Knowledge is power. And the more we know about how these scams work, the emotional impact, the steps we can take to recover, the better equipped we all are to protect ourselves and support people around us.
It's about taking that awareness and turning it into action, both for ourselves and in our communities.
I love that.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. What's one small action, just one thing inspired by what we talked about today, that you feel ready to take? Maybe it's checking out the Scar Survivor School yourself. Maybe it's reaching out to a friend. Or maybe it's just taking a moment to acknowledge what you've been through.
All great ideas.
Whatever it is, remember that even the smallest step can make a world of difference. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay empowered.